All right. Hangout on Air is now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen.
And tonight, we're talking about Survivor Ghost Island Episode 7, Risk It for the Biscuit, which I heartily approve of as an episode title and just a figure of speech generally. I have heard it before. It wasn't like the first time I've ever heard it, but I just like it. It makes me happy to hear and to say.
It's funny.
I don't know. It's just it's got a good mouthfeel, so to speak, and it scans logically, meaning it's not just, random words. It's like, yeah, there's meaning there.
Makes sense. I just never had thought about it that much. So now I'm just kind of trying to ponder it a little bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's cool. I'm liking
it. All right, then. So I hope everybody is going to join us for this new petition we're starting to make "Risk It for the Biscuit" the national motto. No, we're talking about Survivor Ghost Island Episode 7, and how this episode, I think, I feel like I was a little more interested in it than the last couple. I just feel like it was a little more engaging. Not that the other two the last couple were bad, but just in the sense of, I don't know, maybe it felt a little bit more lively to me, and less just a numbers thing.
Well, so I think it was tricky for me because I think I told you I watched it originally, like when it first aired. And I was packing for a very last minute work retreat. It just ended up like another department had booked a very expensive retreat and had some turnover at the top to a point where it they didn't feel comfortable going on a retreat. And so the university was like, well, we need somebody to, take this thing.
All right.
And so we were like, our department was like, well, we can put something together fairly quickly. And so we ended up going. But it meant that I was kind of like rushed to pack, and like plans were all off and everything. It ended up being great. Like it was phenomenal. But point is, watched this while packing the first time. So I kind of knew what happened. And I was like, okay, but I'd still like to watch it again before we record. And I started watching it, and, pieces were coming back to me. And so I started cooking dinner. And so I watched everything, and I know everything that happened, but I guess I never really engaged with it enough to say like, oh, I liked this better. Because I just remember after I was like, oh yeah, I remember watching this, and, Bradley goes, and that was kind of cool, but he seemed like he kind of deserved it.
Yeah.
I mean, through the whole time, particularly in this one, I think what was maybe my favorite part about this, now that I'm kind of talking through it, is that all of the things that we've been sort of critical about him, that we're like, well, maybe he can overcome that. They really, whether it was just this episode because they wanted to highlight it that way, or if it's just part of why he got voted out, it seemed to just like make it all like hyper, like,
yeah,
like the blind spot to the fact that like he could be the one going out. Like, how could you, like, there's not that many people left. Like, how could you just like be so like?
Well, that's where like sometimes you can imagine them wanting to build a narrative and then selectively editing, and it's not a matter that the person hasn't said those things, but it's kind of like, surely when you're filming everybody 24 hours a day, everyone has moments where they snap at someone or they're irritable or whatever. And you could imagine taking someone who is only just as irritable as everybody else, but choosing to show all of those moments and not show the other moments, right? Like you could imagine such a thing happening, but when it is specifically cited as the reason to vote someone out by multiple people, and when doing so does not even make any strategic sense, you have to imagine that there was really something going on there at camp.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's on top of the fact that Bradley apparently is aware of this liability in his character, and actively thought he was working to curb it.
Yes.
And apparently doing so very poorly.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so oddly enough, when I'm talking about finding this episode a little bit less just like predictable or more engaging or whatever, I don't know what it says about that feeling that I actually got spoiled on it. I usually, because I run my D&D campaign on Wednesdays, I'm usually watching the episode the next day, which means that I am at risk for spoilers on Twitter. And usually I remember to mute the tag, but I didn't this week. I forgot. And so I got spoiled that it was going to be Bradley. So that was disappointing, but wanting to know how it was going to play out, just especially because we've seen it happen very often, that something gets set up as, well, there's the obvious strategic vote, and then there's the person everyone's complaining about socially. But often that's all just a matter of working up some drama to try to make it seem like there's suspense, when actually what's going to happen is they're going to vote out the obvious strategic person. Right? Like that happens all the time. And so seeing that was the dynamic playing out, and knowing, oh, but no, they do actually vote for him. And that, and it was actually, it was, unanimous. I mean, it was to the extent that the small group can be. And so I don't know, I was interested, just because, especially when you're getting so close to the merge, you have someone who's not likable. Don't you want to keep that person? Wouldn't that be the normal strategic ploy?
Yeah, I think though.
Oh, you froze up on me there a little bit.
He was that non-likable, where people don't even want to work with him because he's so unlikable.
I mean, well, that obviously is where, it breaks down. If you feel like you can use him and no one would ever vote for him for the million, but if instead you feel like he's going to cause trouble and drama and tension just constantly, I don't know. I mean, maybe, I guess that's an idea, but it's certainly not the standard approach, I guess. But so let's talk about, if we go back to the beginning of the episode, we start with Michael talking about how, he pretty much knew it was going to be him or James. And so in order to, have it lean towards being James and not him, he was willing to vote for James to save himself. But he pretty much knows that he needs to get an idol now. And so he goes looking. He's not worried about getting caught. Angela and Desiree actually discuss that he's off looking for an idol. But they say he's easy pickings, 3 against 1. And then he finds an idol. And I'm just thinking, like, it's this weird thing where it seems like it must just not, this is something we've talked about in many seasons, in a row now, where it just seems like there's been this weird built consensus that you don't go looking for an idol because that's suspicious or something, because it just seems like when people need an idol and they go looking for one, they find one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a little bit of editing of, like, people who don't need idols and aren't overly looking don't necessarily get a lot of time. So we may see it on the extremes. And I'm not saying this, I do agree with you just being in some of the things that we hear, but I also don't want to discount the fact that it could be that the edits tend to, I need an idol, so I go looking and I find one, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't need an idol, but I'm looking to the point where it's at, aggravating everybody else, so I get that edit. But if I'm just kind of interested and I don't find one, I don't get it.
Well, I suppose
they had mentioned it, though.
Yeah, I suppose that's true too, that, like, if, for example, we imagine the person who desperately needs an idol and goes to look a lot but doesn't find it, I mean, how much screen time are they going to devote to a search that doesn't turn up anything?
Right.
So I guess there can be a little bit of editorial bias in that sense. Editorial bias is not the right thing, but confirmation bias. No, I don't know. Just a misunderstanding inadvertently, just due to them focusing on the highlights. Right. Exception bias. Is that no? See, there's some actual psychological phenomenon I'm thinking of and can't place right now. Anyway. It's the whole thing where an anecdote that happens to you seems more important in your own head than tons and tons of data.
Yeah, I know that, like, as manager bias, when it's like it's your project. Mm-hmm. So even in the face of it failing, you still want to prop it up because you're biased to what you oversee. Mm-hmm. So it's similar to that, but I don't remember what the global name for it is outside of.
Yeah. There's also a thing with outliers where, for example, in any industry where it's only a very small number of people who succeed, like for people who want to be, musicians or writers or artists or whatever, and lots of people want to do it, but only a few people really make it to the tip top. And then you ask those people, like, well, what did you do? And they just explain whatever it was that they did. That doesn't mean that following those principles would get everybody the same results.
Right.
So, it may be that they were, lucky or talented in some really specific way, and that, 100,000 other people could try to follow that exact same plan and not get the same results. Anyway, that's starting to get off track. So the idol that Michael finds is the fake idol that Ozzy made in Fans versus Favorites, aka the fucking stick, which I thought was fantastic. And I loved, at this point, the whole idea that, and it turns out that even though this wasn't originally a real idol, living on Ghost Island, its power has grown and now it's real. And I loved all of that. And it was diminished substantially when the later one tried to pull the same thing. And it just...
Well, it did almost in like reverse. Like it took away one of the...
Well, there was like 3 of them because... Well, we'll get back to it. But the point is that I loved this first appearance of that idea when it was talking about taking a real idol and making it, or a fake idol and making it real. I loved it at that moment. But all of that was so having Michael find an idol, I'm happy about, just because I like him, and having him just go out through numbers attrition is not what I want to see happen.
Right. I agree.
And besides, it looks like the merge is going to be next time anyway, so we'll see. I mean, there can still be numbers games after that, but we'll see how that goes. But in any event, that gets us to the reward challenge, where first place gets steak and chicken kebabs plus a grill and spices. Second place gets just chicken kebabs, and third place, nothing. I like this challenge too. They've done it before, but just where the whole team has to hold these ropes to support a platform, just maintaining the tension and build the tower on it. All of that's very good stuff. Did you notice that Navidi, about midway through, picked up on a strategy that basically let them just power through the whole challenge after that nobody else seemed to do, which is that the group would actually let the disc lower all the way to the bottom because it was easier to balance when the base was resting on the thing, even though it meant lifting it and lowering it, lifting it and lowering it. It's apparently easier for them to do that than to just hold it steady at the top.
Yeah, I thought that I didn't realize that they actually set it down. I thought they were just holding it with much lower tension so that it made it easier for somebody to like loosen the tension. But that makes even more sense, as to why they could power through. Yeah, because you don't have to maintain the tension.
Like, and so nobody else seems to do that. But once I noticed them start to do that, they basically just went straight from there all the way to winning first place as soon as they started doing that. Whereas everyone else was still kind of playing around with having to go really slow or something like that. But what they found was just, I guess, what was hard for everybody was holding it up at the high level and having one person, try to move and release, move and disrupt one rope. Whereas if what they all did was lower it all together, and it was easier to balance when it was sitting on the little base.
Right. Right. So the person who had to walk didn't have to, maintain zero tension, literally just walked in, set the thing on, walked back.
Right. They didn't have to reach up as high once the tower started getting bigger. They also didn't have to, so it seemed like it was, as soon as they started doing that, I was wondering like if the other two tribes were going to start copying them, but they didn't seem to, as far as what we saw. I'll note in my in the podcast here that this is the point in my notes where I realized that I'd been saying the green tribe wrong ever since they got formed. Apparently they are Yanuya. I had written down Naguya for some reason, and I don't know what happened there.
I remember almost correcting you that in the first episode, and
yeah.
you roll about something, and I didn't worry about it because I wasn't 100% sure. After that, I just haven't worried about it or paid enough attention. I actually didn't know that you had been saying that still. So
I actually wrote in my notes that it's weird. Probst seems to have started calling Naguya Yanuya for some reason, because I thought that I had heard it properly and up to this time. And I was thinking, is it possible that just in the heat of the challenge, he just started saying it wrong? I mean, obviously, I think in hindsight, they probably would have they would have ADR'd that out. I think in hindsight, even if that's what really happened.
Yeah.
But so obviously it was my mistake. I looked it up and discovered it, but I was just sort of like surprised by myself. Just like, I don't know. I think there's sort of a similar sound, but I don't know. Anyway, this is where I will acknowledge that I got it wrong. But it is, in fact, Yanuya. The one thing that Navidi's strategy seems to bypass the need for, because we didn't really see much of this from their tribe, is the arguing that the other tribes kept having to do, where people were saying, hey, you've got too much tension, you need more slack. And they'd say, oh, I'm not even pulling it at all. And just, they can't even agree, like the perception of each other's level of tension.
Who's messing it up the most? Yeah.
Yeah. So we had lots of that arguing, but Navidi won first place. And there's more discussion of the Malolo curse as Yanuya. I almost said Naguya again because it still says that in my notes. More discussion of the Malolo curse as Yanuya secures second place. And then here's where we have the first place tribe can pick someone to go to Ghost Island from either the second or third place tribe. And finally, we get a non-rock choice on the basis that, well, let's find someone who's been there and send them again to keep it more of a mystery. I see. This is where I feel like the whole mechanic is still a little bit awkward, because like that whole strategy feels kind of like something where people don't know what basis they should use to send someone or not, because it's not clear if it's a good or bad thing. So that sort of argument of let's send someone who's been there before is kind of like getting pepperoni on the pizza. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I think everyone's okay with pepperoni, right? it's, it's kind of arbitrary.
Yeah. No, I think that that's true. And part that frustrated me is that we went through all this like speculation. Like I was, had all these, ideas of what could possibly happen that was mixing up Ghost Island because they were advertising the heck out of that
Mm-hmm.
during the basketball games. And it turns out that what it is that they get to pick from the two losers. Like nothing else was different that I
Well,
saw.
they got to when Kellen got to play the game, she got to pick from three instead of two, and two out of the three. So instead of a
That's right.
50-50 chance, it was a 2 out of 3 chance.
That's right. That's right. Which
Mm-hmm.
actually I did like, but I forgot because I was so frustrated because
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was just yeah.
I like it in principle, but it feels like a half measure to fix the issues that with that whole mechanic, right? Something Dalton Ross said that I thought was a really good idea, and it's kind of obvious once you hear it, which is why not make it a skill challenge of some kind instead of just a random draw?
So the skill challenge to see if you can draw the 50. The
Or, well, the whole idea of is it like whether they get to play or not is a whole separate matter. But instead of just saying two of these three things have a prize and one doesn't, so instead of that, why not have it be you could potentially win this thing, but only if you can beat this skill challenge?
yeah, that's true. That does make sense.
Yeah, I feel like that would be way more interesting. They don't have to make it like a big deal thing that they spend 5 minutes of screen time on. They could have it be quick, right? But yeah, they could even have it be like Survivor trivia, or could be varied. It could be different kinds of challenges depending on what the possible reward is. I just it's frustrating that it's so easy to come up with ideas that feel like they would be better than what they're actually doing when it's really not clear what the basis for their choice is.
Right.
Anyway, so Kellen gets picked. She gets to play this time, and this time, last time she chose not to play because her vote was too important. She didn't want to risk losing it. But this time, with a 2 out of 3 chance, she decides she wants to play and wins an advantage. And this time, it's the steal a vote that got Michaela voted out. And in particular, the one that, when Michaela was on the sit-out bench and it was right at her feet, but it was actually Sarah that saw it.
Yes.
And but yeah, this is the whole weird thing where like it used to be a steal a vote, but now it's just an extra vote. And it's like, why though?
Right. That's
But
what
why
this is the
though?
one where we said like almost the same thing in reverse. Like because instead of adding power to something that had nothing, you're just taking some away because you
Yeah.
think that that's too good, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and I didn't even necessarily object to that necessarily, but it did seem just like, but why? I mean, why not have it just be real? I mean, it's one thing to say a fake idol gets to be a real idol now, but why actually take power away from something?
Well,
Especially if the whole idea is reversing the curse.
I think they felt like this thing was too powerful.
Yeah, I get that, but it's also just like at a certain point, this episode brought two new idols and an extra vote into the game. It's not like they're being stingy
Yeah.
with the presence here. But in any event, the I had a little thought while I was watching this in terms of the way they have their whole mechanic here. And it was a thought that I hope isn't what's really going on, but it's like the only thing I can think of that would be an actual good reason from their perspective to do it the way they're doing, which is that theoretically it lets them switch up who gets to play and not, depending on who gets sent. You know what I mean? Like, depending on who it is that gets sent to Ghost Island, they can decide whether that person gets to play or not. I would hope that they don't do that, but
yeah.
But I can't, like that would make like that's a logical reason, at least. Like if that's what they wanted to do, this would allow them to do that. But I would not want them to do that. So, yeah, I don't know.
I hope you do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I just can't really think of any other good reason to do it the way they're doing it, unless they just, whoever it is that made that decision thinks that, random luck is the most interesting way to do things on a show like this, which seems kind of contrary to a lot of the regular design philosophy of the show.
Yes.
Anyway, so back at camp, we have Bradley, who is impatient and hungry, continues to boss people around. When they want to just bask in the glow of their victory, like they have Donathan, who is kind of an MVP during the challenge, just talking about like, oh yeah, I don't know, it's just good, feels good to do all this. And Bradley's just like, hey, are you going to help me with this? Like interrupting him, just talking about how happy he was to have contributed, and yeah. And then I had a note here. What a shock that Bradley has a problem with being a dick, even in his regular life.
Yeah, this is the part where he tells us about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's definitely true that it's, we've talked so many times over the years about how anyone who comes on Survivor with this idea that you're going to try to act differently than your normal way of acting would be, that's a very difficult thing to do, because the nature of the psychological and physical stresses in the game wear people down, and you're going to be more likely to act in the ways that come naturally to you. But usually that's enhanced by making people more tired, more irritated, more frustrated, more stressed, meaning more likely to maybe snap at someone than they would if they were feeling rested. But for him to say that being a jerk is something that always derails things for him, even in his regular life, I'm just thinking, okay, that seems like something you should work on. Because right now, I think, stage one, be aware of the problem is good, but maybe you're not all the way done with that step, because you're aware of it as a problem in the abstract, but you don't seem to be aware of when you're doing it, or at least not aware enough. Yes. But like just the fact that he actually talks in this episode about how I know this is a problem that I have, and I'm constantly trying to hold my tongue so that I don't do that, at the same time that everyone else is going, this guy is a total jerk. I hate being around him. Yeah. Let's get rid of him because he's awful.
Could you imagine if he wasn't holding his tongue?
Wow. Yeah. So, only everyone else seems to be pretty much on the same page that like they would like to have him go. Even Dom, but Dom is the only one who's kind of on the page of, well, but if we vote him out, that kind of goes against what our sort of plan was as far as the whole old Malala, old Navidi alliances. And we're kind of giving up a possible 3, instead of taking a 3-2 advantage and making it 3-1, we could instead have it be 2-2. So that's maybe not a great idea strategically. And that's why I think it's so interesting that they actually decided to do that anyway. It was that significant. Yeah. Anyway, over at Yanuya, we also have more from Wendell and talking about missing his girlfriend, Nicole, on her birthday. And he was glad to be able to win the challenge on her birthday. He's glad to get the food. I continue to like him, and good for him that he goes to look for an idol anyway, while everyone else is sleeping off the meal. So he finds, oddly enough, like we see him find a clue first and then the idol. But I guess that's a little bit like the first idol that was found earlier in the season, I think was a clue first. I don't know. It's all messy. But like the one that Michael found, earlier in this episode, he didn't find a clue first, as far as we saw.
Yeah, and it wasn't a very complicated clue, which was odd.
Yeah. So in any event, he finds the idol itself, and it's the necklace that Eric gave away to Natalie, which is another great one to find. But the one thing that I couldn't help but notice about it is it's huge. How do you hide that thing? You had to rebury it.
Yeah.
I mean, because you can't keep that in your bag and have no one know. I mean, so, but see, this is the one where the note with this one basically said the exact same thing as the fake idol from earlier, where it's been hiding, growing in power. And I'm like, well, but this one was real before.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I like it. Just this one felt off. That the language was almost exactly the same when it's not. Doesn't actually fit the narrative of this artifact in the same way. But I actually kind of loved the idea of it being this great big thing, because it wasn't originally an idol. It was originally like, the individual immunity idol necklace, which is not generally intended to be something you hide.
Right. It's meant to be like big and
ostentatious.
Ostentatious. Like that's whole part of the point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in any event, though, I like to have him find it, just because I like him, and that'll keep mixing it up, especially since it seems like he ends up kind of in the middle of the resumed Chris and Dom feud next week, which I still find kind of hilarious that that's a thing. But, that it's not so much a thing in this episode. But anyway, I like Wendell, and I like him having the idol.
Yeah.
It occurs to me, though, that if next week is the merge and he has the necklace hidden at the beach somewhere, presumably they'd let him get it, even if they're moving to another beach.
There's got to be some way to like handle that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a way, because otherwise that's kind of would be BS. But I don't know what the idea would be. In any event, we also, before the immunity challenge, spend a little bit of time with Malolo, and this is where Desiree talks about the difficulty of all the losing, and this is where they decide to burn the little Malolo sign, the little flag, to reverse the curse. And it was all kind of silly, but fine. It's like, okay, it's all in kind of good fun. And then how funny that it did actually seem to, not that I really believe in the curse per se, but that, maybe there was some element of their own morale that was improved in a way.
Yep. It worked.
Yep.
For whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. So we get to the immunity challenge. Kellen returns, and I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you noticed this, but that Kellen comes to join the rest of her team, and Desiree immediately starts like looking to her and like trying to ask her like little questions, like what happened there, and Kellen's just kind of like doesn't give her any answers there. I just thought it was interesting that there was a request that was not fulfilled, kind of in body language there.
Yeah, well, and we saw that Kellen's trying to be, to use this to like turn her game around and like be stronger, and like so maybe not just feel like she has to tell everybody, So maybe working for her as well.
Yeah. So we get to the challenge, and this is another water challenge where they're trying to recover some rings and then doing the ring toss. And we had Dom with some two really spectacular sort of belly flops where like he wasn't willing to commit to the dive, but he didn't just jump either. He kind of did a half dive, resulting in a belly flop both times. You know, and like at a certain point, you can say, just jump in feet first. That's okay. But he kind of wants to dive, but he's, I guess, too hesitant to do it for real. And
yeah.
Yep. And then Dom really kind of slows down Navidi, just not being a strong swimmer. You know, hey, you know, not everybody is. I would probably slow down my tribe if I were in one of those challenges. I mean, I can swim, but I'm not fast necessarily. But then Yanuya is dominating the ring toss for a while. Let's see. Yeah, and then we see Wendell actually get 3 rings in a row just with successive throws. That was pretty cool. And so they get first place. We continue to see Donathan doing pretty well at the challenges, just given that I think up until this episode, I had not really thought of him as someone who was strong in the challenges per se, but he seemed like he did really, you know, he was, you know, a good contribution to the reward challenge this time, and also seemed like he was doing really well in the ring toss portion this time.
Yeah, and I think he probably would have felt the same way, because he was how proud he was to contribute in the other challenge would indicate that he was not having a habit of overperforming in challenges. You know? Right. I don't necessarily remember him being a huge liability. Maybe one, but you know.
Maybe it was just a matter of like, you know, he's obviously in relatively good shape, but maybe there's just he has kind of a tendency to not always put himself out there, right. and he just felt sort of rewarded by his attempts to be a little bit more out there. Let's see, and it actually gets to the point where Navidi and Malolo are tied. But then Michael wins second place for Malolo, and the curse is broken.
Yep.
And we go to the commercial with Libby saying that Bradley is disrespectful to everybody, and she wants him voted out.
Which is true, and also what ended up happening.
Yeah. Oh, you broke up on me a little bit there. I got that it is what happened, but then we lost the rest of your sentence there.
Even though it wasn't, you know, obvious. You know, and sometimes when they tease this at the beginning, right before going to, sometimes when they tease this right before going to commercial, it's not always what's going to come true. So. Exactly.
So Bradley continues to, like, even when they've lost the challenge and they're going to go to tribal council, you know, I guess he just can't help himself, because we have stuff like Dom, you know, trying to do the whole, like, sorry everybody that I was kind of slow. And then Libby saying, well, we win as a tribe or we lose as a tribe. And Bradley just has to pipe in with, well, maybe you just had too much coffee. And there was just this, you know, it's just like big wet trombone sound in the middle of the conversation of like, read the room, Bradley. we were just having a thing where we're trying to reassure all of us that we're a team here. And yeah, anyway. So we do have Bradley with Dom and Donathan talking about voting out Libby. And this would be the idea that if they were continuing with the numbers thing and they're saying, okay, well, if, you know, is it going to be Libby or, oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. That wouldn't really be the numbers thing, because Chelsea would be the one that would be with Dom and Bradley, right? Am I remembering that right? I have got it all blurred together in my head now. The point is, though, that Dom, Donathan, and Bradley do discuss voting for Libby. Bradley seems utterly unaware that anyone's even talking about him. He thinks Libby's more of a threat, and he thinks that Chelsea's, you know, in on this plan, that everybody's going to vote for Libby. And then Chelsea tells Libby it's actually Bradley. And we know, especially with hindsight, that that's actually true. But it's nice to see Libby recognize the possibility that they could just be telling her that as a decoy.
Right.
And especially given that Chelsea then admits to the camera that it's not actually a decided thing yet. They're still kind of going back and forth.
Right.
Of course, they always say that, but the point is that it's smart for Libby to not just take it for granted that just because someone told her it was going to be Bradley, that was true.
Like Bradley, who just took it for granted that it was going to be Libby and didn't question whether that might not be true.
And then goes to tribal council and talks about how the whole 5 of them all just get along swimmingly. In fact, it's almost shocking from a survivor perspective how well they all get along with each other.
Yes.
And you could just see the other 4 of them behind him kind of just seriously good. Like there's a couple of just real side-eye looks at him, just like, what? What are you talking about?
We're literally voting for you because we don't get along with you.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that, and then there's discussion of past decisions, and how Morgan got blindsided, and Dom might still be holding a grudge about that. Libby talks about how, she was previously loyal to her other alliance. She could be loyal to a new one. And we see, I think, what is another perfect example of what Bradley must just be like all the time, which is he starts to jump in to offer counterpoints to her explanation of events, and then has to actually stop himself because, well, okay, but I guess I wasn't actually there, so I don't know. And everyone's like, yeah, right. Yeah. So you are speculating on events that not only were you not there for, but you did not even get to see the TV show version of. Yeah. So, and he must just do that all the time. And then he actually talks about how, he doesn't want to be the dick who just keeps playing devil's advocate because he hates that person too. And I think that there must be a piece of him that is worried that that is in fact what has happened. And he's kind of fishing for confirmation that he has succeeded in not doing that. Even though he is maybe kind of aware of the possibility that maybe he has been that. And that's where Dom kind of says, because there's also value in not being someone who creates conflict all the time. And lots of dialogue abstracted about, it's very important in this sort of game to be aware of your behavior around others and how you treat people and who you would feel comfortable working with in the long run. And you see Bradley looking more and more nervous. And then sure enough, they vote him out, and he says the right words, good job, guys, good luck in the rest of the game, but it's kind of talking through gritted teeth, which, is fair. I mean, it's hard to, begrudge people, but, he says in his final words that he's pretty sure they voted him out because he's a threat. If he had made the merge, he would have won.
Yeah. No, it's because of statements like that you got voted out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not sorry to see Bradley go. I mean, I don't know. It might be that when he is able to be in a little bit more control of himself, he's able to be a little bit more aware. But yeah, I could, just from what we saw, we could interpret one sort of narrative. And like we said at the beginning of this episode, there have certainly been seasons where we can imagine that someone getting a villain edit is maybe not really like that all the time, but they just get the selective edit that shows every time they are a jerk. Right. And then, so we could imagine that, except that in this event, even when it didn't otherwise make strategic sense, we had 4 people choose to vote him out specifically because he was a jerk all the time.
Yes.
Created conflict. Yeah.
He was probably generating a lot of that villain edit for himself.
Yeah. So in any event, next week, Merge. Also, Dom versus Chris, still a thing. Which I'm delighted by, honestly, at this point, just because of how stupid it was to begin with. To just have that, it's like, sure, it's a rivalry, and why not? Okay, sure. It's like spy versus spy.
True.
And
there'd be no reason for it not to still be a thing, because neither of them has, backed down from whatever it is that.
Well, even once they got split apart, Dom couldn't shut up about it, talking about how relieved he was to not have Chris breathing down his neck, and it's like, you instigated that.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to it.
Like, I sucker punched him and now he wants to hit me back. What a jerk. Anyway, we'll see how that goes.
Yep, we'll see how that ends up.
But I'm excited for the merge.
Yes, excited for the merge.
All right, so I think that'll do it for this time. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. And check out ChristianaEllis.com for all the podcasts I do. And we'll be back next week or later this week. We'll see for more talking about Survivor.
Sounds great.